Windows Server 2019 System Administration. Welcome back everybody. I'm Prakash Vadan, your trainer for this entire series. In today's topic, we are going to talk about one of the important role that we find in Windows Server 2019, that's known as a hypervisor. So over here, this hypervisor, if you see over here, I've also given in a bracket as a virtualization because there is a misunderstanding among the proper utilization of the meaning or the deploying of this any virtualization in our environment. Some people used to say hypervisor, some people often say the virtualization. So in today's class, in today's discussion, we are going to clear this concept, the meaning of this hypervisor or the meaning of this virtualization in terms of the proper deployment in your any server family operating system. First, we need to understand what is the difference between this hypervisor and the virtualization. But before we begin with this series, I do believe that you would like to know the reason, what was the main reason why people come up with this hypervisor. That means what was the need. Though we have all the physical devices where the operating systems are installed, we do have failover mechanism nowadays, we do have network load balancing. In spite of that, why does people always they are excited to learn about this virtualization? Why do they use the term hypervisor and all? So before we begin with this, I'd like to take you to this one page. If you see over here, actually the concept of this hypervisor was developed in 1960s to 70s only. The main reason for developing or the development phase of this hypervisor was for the testing purpose. Actually, it was seen on the mainframe computers developed by IBM. See, it was basically used for the testing purpose on the time sharing systems and exploring your new hardware concepts, because before we come up with the new idea, before we deploy any operating system, before we deploy the concept of any hardware, first we need to make sure that how this idea works actually. That means we need to make sure that these softwares, okay, the hardware drivers, the firmware, that whatever we are implementing in a new operating system, you need to make sure that all of these systems perform their tasks as per the expectation. So in that case, first we need to go to the testing environment. So we cannot deploy any kind of this software or the hardware driver, this concept directly on a new physical machine. So in that case, they started working in a concept of this virtualization so that it can be used in a testing environment. So hypervisor, you might have heard very often hypervisor and the virtual machine, but by today's class, I do believe, I do guarantee that all of you are going to understand the meaning of the hypervisor and the meaning of the virtual machine. If you have a look over here, it's a virtual machine actually. That means virtual machine monitored. So hypervisor is actually not directly your virtualization, or this is not the virtual machine. So what is hypervisor over here? Hypervisor is simply a platform over which the virtualized operating system runs actually. That means hypervisor is a platform. In this platform, on top of this, you are going to install your virtualized operating system. So it's a software that creates and runs virtual machine. That means I hope you understood. Hypervisor is nothing. It is a platform on which you are going to run the software actually in a term of your virtual machine. That means virtual machine runs on the platform of hypervisor. So hypervisor is a one platform on which the virtual machine works actually. So hypervisor allows us, okay, to use or to install the operating system. So if I see over here, hypervisor allows one host computer to support multiple guest virtual machines. That means in a form of platform, we are going to have one hypervisor. So inside this hypervisor, after providing us with this opportunity or the platform, inside this hypervisor we are going to install multiple guest operating system, and that guest operating system is simply we term as a virtual machine actually. And this virtual machine, how it is going to work, okay, whose resources these virtual machines are going to be used, this we are going to discuss in detail, because without having the proper knowledge or understanding of the virtual machine and the hypervisor and even the resources that these host operating systems are going to use or the guest operating systems are going to use, trust me guys, you will not understand anything. So I would like to take you to this image over here. we have two types of hypervisors first. See over here, hypervisor, it's a platform. Okay, that gives you such a platform where you are going to install your virtual operating system that we call a virtual machines. The hypervisor itself is your host. Okay, that is going to host something, that is going to provide a certain platform. So on top of this host, we are going to install the guest operating system. So our prime concern over here is the hypervisor. So we do have a types of hypervisor over here. By and large, so far till this date, we are having only two type of hypervisor. Number one is known as the bare metal or native hypervisor. That's a type 1. And number 2, hosted hypervisor, and that is used for the testing purpose or the learning purpose. I hope you understood that whatever virtual machine that we are using, even that I am using right now, okay, in order to make the videos, in order to make this tutorial, trust me guys, I am using type 2 hypervisor. That means this is the simple virtual machine. So I repeat again, there are two types of hypervisor, type 1 and type 2. Type 1 is the bare metal, that is also known as a native hypervisor, and type 2 is a hosted hypervisor that is used for testing purpose or the learning purpose. Simple example, the virtual machine that you are using in order to install the operating system for the testing purpose, even that was done for the same purpose by this IBM also, that we have gone through 60s and the 70s. Now, the most important thing over here is to understand the types of this hypervisor. Of course, so far I think I already made it clear to you all, hypervisor is nothing, just a platform. This is software based platform, and sometimes it is also called a firmware based platform also, that helps you to install your guest operating system in order to deploy any software, in order to test any kind of your hardware drivers and all. Okay, so if you talk about the utilization of these two types of hypervisor, trust me, all the enterprise level, all the industry level, they are going to use only type 1 because that's bit secure. But when we talk about the testing environment, let's say you like to install one server family operating system, you like to test some of the group policies, you like to test some of the drivers, okay, these things are going to be installed in type 2 hypervisor. So on top of this hypervisor, you are going to install your operating system that is known as a guest operating system. So I guess this image will make entire concept of the thing that we're going to discuss about the hypervisor and virtual machine is going to make clear. Now, when we talk about the type 1 hypervisor, that is used in enterprise level, all the bigger industries, okay, software companies, any higher industries, they always prefer to use type 1 hypervisor, not type 2. Type 2 is only used for the testing purpose that we use in order to deploy any operating system in our network environment. Okay, so let's focus on this type 1 hypervisor. In type 1 hypervisor always works on top of your physical hardware. That means if you would like to deploy the type 1 hypervisor, first you are going to have the specific hardware actually. That's a specific physical hardware. Just above this hardware, you are going to install the platform that we call a hypervisor. So for example, I have used over here VMware ESXi. Okay, now if I talk about the software that I am going to install in a form of platform in order to install rest of the operating system as a guest, over here, if you focus that there is first, the layer is a physical hardware layer. So on top of this physical hardware, rather than using your any guest operating system, we have installed the hypervisor. Directly it works as the operating system. It's not like that, you bought one new laptop and you start installing the Windows operating system. No, we are not going to install Windows operating system over here for this instance. So first you are going to have one physical hardware. So on top of that hardware, you are going to install the hypervisor. That means the platform, that's a software base, that is also known as a firmware. Okay, so hypervisor acts as its own operating system. If you remember, when you buy any hardware device from the Cisco, let's say for example Cisco, when you buy the Cisco router or Cisco this manageable switch, you might have noticed it already have built-in operating system. That means the command that you use is actually based on that operating system. That means that device itself has its own operating system. So over here, rather than installing any operating system on top of your hardware, you are going to install one platform. So that is known as a hypervisor. Okay, so for instance, I have taken the VMware. You might be using your Hyper-V as well as a platform. So Hypervisor will work as a platform, but that is also an independent operating system actually. It will manage all the resources that would like to use it over here. So on top of this hypervisor, or what we call this platform, you are going to install the guest operating system. I repeat again, you have a first hardware device. Above hardware, you are going to have installation of one platform in the form of software or your firmware, that is your hypervisor. This itself will work as an operating system. So on top of this hypervisor, we are going to install the operating system, and that is known as a guest operating system. If you see at the bottom, the first one I have used physical hardware as a host. That means it is going to provide you the service. Here we are going to host something. Example, you invite someone, some of your guests for your tea, for dinner, lunch, anything, any party. In that case, you will be treated as a host. You are going to provide a service. And the one who is coming to visit your home, your house, that will be your guest. That means the services that the guest is about to receive always depends upon the host. You might have invited them to have a cup of tea or the lunch or dinner, anything. Over here, guest will not have their choice. That means the guest is going to receive all the services that's been offered by you. That means your host. So now, on top of this hypervisor, on top of this platform, we are going to install the operating system, and that operating system is known as a guest operating system. And it might be you are installing this operating system in order to test your any software, any driver, anything, any application over here. Now the next important question comes over here. So this guest operating system is already based on a hypervisor. So hypervisor itself act as an independent operating system. So on top of this, you are going to install your guest operating system. That means the virtualization environment has already been created. So the operating system that has been installed in a form of guest operating system, now it doesn't have its physical hardware directly actually. This is the virtualized environment now. So what happens now? When we install the guest operating system on top of hypervisor, guest operating system is going to use all the physical devices directly from their host device over here. That means the physical hardware below the hypervisor. That means guest operating system has a physical device access from the host. So let's say your physical hardware as a host, you might be having 4-core this processor, you can share the processor to the guest. If you are having, let's say 8 GB of RAM, let's say 8 GB of RAM, you can share that resources of RAM from your host to the client. That means if you are trying to ask, so how many guest operating system can be installed on top of your hypervisor, on top of this platform, software-based platform? It depends upon the size of your RAM, depends upon the core of your processor, and depends upon the size of your hard disk. That means as much as number of guest operating system you want, that can be installed. If you have heard, but we have heard in Hyper-V, we can install 2 or 3 only this virtual machines. That is based on a license. Okay, but over here, then as much as number of operating system you like to install in a form of guest. Okay, as long as you have the space of the processor, you have the space in a RAM, you have a space in a hard disk, that can be installed. That means there is no limit actually. If you have got 4 TB of hard disk, you can share it to the guest. If you have a 4 GB of RAM, you can share it to the guest. If you have 4 core in your processor, you can share it to the guest. That means the number of guests always depends upon the physical setup of the host. So over here, all of these guests are going to use the hardware resources directly from the host. Don't forget. In our type 1 hypervisor, the guest is going to use all the devices directly from your physical hardware. That is the type 1, your hypervisor. So when we talk about the type 2 hypervisor, so have a look over here, because I do believe you have to make this concept clear. Now, when we talk about type 2 hypervisor, if you remember, I told you all this company or the bigger organization or enterprise level, the people are going to use only type 1 hypervisor. But when we talk about the type 2 hypervisor, this is used for the testing purpose. Okay, now if our testing and along with the learning purpose as well. Okay, now over here in type 2 hypervisor, there will be base 1 hardware. Of course, the entire operating system hypervisor that we install in our network environment, that has to be on top of your hardware, and of course we need a platform. So over here, first there will be one host hardware. Just on top of the hardware, you are going to install the host operating system. Remember, you buy a laptop from any company. Okay, you insert your pen drive where the operating system bootable files are there. Straight away your operating system will get installed in that hardware. That means just on top of your hardware, the host operating system will be installed. Whereas if you notice over here, on top of physical hardware, you are not going to have the host operating system. This physical device itself is acting as a host in a type 2 hypervisor. Whereas if I go to the type 2 hypervisor, on top of your hardware, on top of the host, okay, in comparing to the type 1, on top of the hardware you are going to install the host operating system. That's a clear difference. So on top of this host operating system over here, let's say Windows 10. Okay, you bought one laptop. Okay, in the laptop you install your Windows 10 operating system. Now on top of that Windows 10 operating system that is being acted as a host operating system, on top of that you are going to install your hypervisor. That means the platform. That might be VMware Workstation, that might be your sometime Hyper-V also. So over here in type 2 hypervisor, there will be one hardware. After on top of this hardware, you are going to install the host operating system. That means buying your laptop. So you install one operating system, Windows 10 for instance. So on top of that Windows 10, you are going to install your VMware Workstation, or it might be Hyper-V. So on that Hyper-V, on that virtualized environment, you are going to install the guest operating system. So that is the difference between type 1 hypervisor and type 2 hypervisor. And one more difference, if you have noticed over here, in type 2 hypervisor, the guest operating system will not have direct access to the hardware. Why? Because over here, the guest operating system is installed on top of the hypervisor, not on top of your host. That means over here, the host operating system is first installed, then the hypervisor is installed. That means all this guest operating system, they will depend upon the physical setup of your host operating system. That's a difference. That means in type 2 hypervisor, the guest operating system will not have direct access to the physical device like we have over here. All of this guest operating system are going to use the physical setup from the host over here directly. That means the physical hardware. Whereas in type 2 hypervisor, that is not possible, because you see on top of host there is a hypervisor. So inside this hypervisor, the guest operating system is installed. That means whatever resources this guest operating system is going to be used, that depends upon the hypervisor over here, not on this hardware. So if I talk about a type 2 hypervisor over here, it runs within the conventional OS. As I said, it might be Windows 10 or any operating system. Okay, now if I talk about the guest operating system that I'm going to use, okay, or let's say this virtualized environment, or let's say hypervisor that I'm going to use in a form of example over here, that's a virtual box. It may be your VMware also, as I said. Okay, and I've also mentioned over here, it does not have direct access to the host hardware like processor, RAM, hard disk. Why? It's going to utilize all this from here, not from here. Now, if I have to talk about the comparison between this type 1 hypervisor and type 2 hypervisor, number one, type 1 is known as a bare metal or a native hypervisor. Whereas if I go to the type 2, that is known as a hosted. Okay, number two difference. Over here in type 1, hardware virtualization is possible. That means directly from the hardware you are going to use it even for the client. Whereas if I talk about the type 2, your hypervisor, this is OS virtualization, not hardware virtualization. So that's why type 2 will not have physical access to your hardware. Number three, it has direct access to the host hardware, as I've already said. Whereas in your type 2, it's not possible. It seems like the same point is just repeated over here, but I do believe that you understood. Now, if I talk about the performance in your virtualized environment in your hypervisor, type 2 hypervisor has a higher performance comparing to the type 2. And even if I have to talk about the security, okay, type 1 is bit secure than a type 2 your hypervisor. Now, if I have to talk about what is the necessity, or let's say what is the advantage of using this hypervisor and the virtualized operating system. So let's have a look to this image. See, let's say you have one domain controller, number 2 you have a additional domain controller, and you also do have your file server. Let's say a namespace, distributed file system is also there. The namespace is hosted over there. That means if you see over here, minimum 2 to 3 servers are deployed in order to provide the complete client architecture environment to your client. That means many devices are supposed to buy. So it's all about the economy, and it's not only sometime about only the economy, it's about the management also. It's about always, in our network environment, we always look after the failover mechanism. We always look after the restore mechanism. So in that case, so assume that you have one primary domain controller, okay, physical, okay, over here I've used PDC server 19. Let's say you have one primary domain controller in one physical machine, and you do have an additional domain controller in another one physical machine, and you might be hosting file server in some other operating system in other hardware device. Now you think about the maintenance of all of this device. If the system goes down, recovery time. So in that case, if we use hypervisor and the virtual machine in our network environment, in our client architecture environment, in that case, what's going to happen? You don't have to take a backup of all of these servers one by one. We take the backup of this virtual operating system, and that can be restored within 5 to 10 minutes. Trust me, guys. Within 5 to 10 minutes, your all the 3 or 10 or 20 servers can be restored as it is. So that's gonna save you a lot of time. So taking the backup, there is no issue now. Okay, you can take the backup easily, just a copy of folder. See, virtual operating system is installed in a form of your virtual drive. So that virtual drive is nothing, just a one folder, as if you are creating one folder only. So inside the folder, your operating system is installed. Inside the folder, your virtual, your hard drive is created. So when you have to take a backup of your entire operating system, let's say 2, 3, 4 operating system from your network environment, you don't have to go to the physical devices and take the backup. Just take the backup of one folder, and you see the entire operating system along with your group policy, whatever policies that you have deployed can be recovered within 5 to 10 minutes. So that is why nowadays the entire things are moving into your hypervisor. That means moving towards the cloud. You might be wondering, why did I use the word cloud? Trust me, guys, in a cloud, entire things are virtualized. That means Hyper-V, something like that, or let's say hypervisor is there, and your number 2, type 2, your hypervisor is used in order to install the operating system, but the base that we're going to use is a type 1 only. Okay, so I hope this made a bit clear to you the necessity of this hypervisor, necessity of your virtual machine. So before I wrap up, I'd like to tell you one more time over here, hypervisor is nothing, just a one software based platform on which you are going to install the virtual operating system. Okay, and why we do that? It saves your time. It's bit secure in order to take in terms of the backup also. It will reduce your cost for the hardware devices. So nowadays, entire operating system, entire services that we are using over the cloud, they all are based on a virtualization. That means your complete implementation of your hypervisor. So that's why if you'd like to stay in this IT infrastructure in the world of information technology as a system administrator or the system engineer, I do suggest you please be familiar with this virtualized technology, because the next generation entire application, the operating system will be completely on this virtual environment. So I hope this made a bit clear for you the necessity of implementing the hypervisor or the virtual operating system. In our next video, we are going to see now how to install this virtualized environment, okay, and how to deploy the operating system, and how we can take the backup of all this operating system. As I said, it can be restored in 5 to 10 minutes. That saves you a lot of pain actually. So I do believe it was quite fruitful, informative to you. If you think it was good and easygoing, please do like and subscribe. Thank you.